Welcome to the Trees and Lines podcast, where we discuss fresh perspectives on utility vegetation management. Don't forget to follow along on LinkedIn for the latest news. Now, let's dive into this week's episode. Welcome to the Trees and Lines podcast. Today, I'm going to be joined by Brian Sprinkle as my co-host, and we are welcoming Liz Westberg, who is the self-identified tree nerd from Grow Solutions. Welcome, Liz.
Well, hey, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, appreciate your joining us. Hey, Liz, why don't we start off by you telling us a little bit about yourself and Grow Solutions?
Absolutely. All right. So technically, my job title is business developer with Grow Solutions. Self-identified tree nerd. Absolutely, that's what I prefer to go with most days. So Grow Solutions is a tree growth regulator applicator company. I have been with the company now for 7 going on 8 years here, I think, sometime in the next few months. My background is actually not even in trees originally. I was a wildlife major from University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. But like a lot of people, I kind of ended up in tree care, and I ended up being lured into the utility arborist world with the promise of travel and adventure, and both of those things have turned out to be true. So I got into working with tree growth regulators because Grow Solutions is owned by a company called Rainbow Companies, and we make that product as well as do the applications. And I've really, really enjoyed being a part of something in the utility arborist world that is working to save or preserve trees in the utility forest, in the urban forest, really. And that's been something that's been a big draw for me and kept me going.
Yeah, well, good. You know, Liz, tree growth regulators have been around for a long time. I once came across the Utility Arborists Association's very first newsletter from the 70s.
Oh, wow.
And the subject matter was tree growth regulators. Tree growth regulators were a little different back then. So, yeah,
Yes.
tell us a little bit about the evolution of this and then where we are today.
Tree growth regulators have really been investigated since going back all the way to the 50s. So, first newsletter in the 70s is pretty cool, but they started looking into different chemicals that would help slow the growth of trees way back in the 50s. And some of those older ones had varying and interesting results for the health of the tree, and a lot of different methods for application. They were using spray on things, they were using trunk injections, they tried all sorts of fun stuff. Um, the older ones that we would typically call those type 1 TGRs, or type 1 tree growth regulators, and they work typically by stopping cell division entirely where they're applied. And what that means for the tree is mixed results for its health, which can cause further problems down the line, both for the owner of that tree and even the utility if you got now a dead tree in the right of way. It was in the 80s and 90s really that they started experimenting as growth regulators with these type 2 TGRs that we use more commonly today. So by far the most common active ingredient is paclobutrazol. And that's also been around since the 40s, but they originally looked at that one as a fungicide. Doesn't work really well as a fungicide at all. But they noticed as they were studying it that it did have these growth regulation properties. They were using those as trunk injections, and again, kind of mixed results. If you've been around for a while, you probably remember they're really hard to get predictable results when doing trunk injections, and they were also doing some damage to the bark of the tree because they had to be suspended typically in an alcohol. So you can do maybe one injection and get away with it, but if you're trying to do it over and over again every few years, you're going to run into issues for the health of that tree. Fast forward a few more years, in the late 90s and early 2000s, they finally got a formulation that was a soil treatment, so either as a basal drench or as a soil injection with a probe. And from there, we're really seeing a lot better results, both in terms of the health of the tree and in terms of being able to narrow down those rates and get really good predictable results for regulating the growth. So way different than what you might have seen a few decades ago. Even in the last 10, 15 years, we've come a long way in how we actually do the applications.
I think tree growth regulators is a fascinating realm within the utility space. So I was going to ask you a little bit about the economics and market space behind tree growth regulators. Like,
Sure.
Just tell me a little bit about the adoption overall within the market, and we'll just focus on the U.S. market because I know that's
Yeah.
where you're primarily focused. Like, tell me about the adoption, the economics behind why it makes sense, where the applications are primarily being done now, what target trees, just a little bit more information on the business case behind it.
Oh man, there's a lot of questions in there. We can break that apart bit by bit.
Yeah.
So, business case at its real heart, what we're looking at doing is helping utilities control their pruning costs in the future. So, using tree growth regulators is going to slow down the regrowth of that tree 40 to 70%, depending on the species, it's going to vary, thus extending out the amount of time between pruning events on a given tree. So it's been kind of used in a lot of different ways, but the primary use is going to be distribution lines. Where you don't have the requirements to maintain really large corridors and high clearance, and where you also have a lot more landowners and property owners who want to keep the trees on that property. So distribution lines, as well as some of the lower voltage subtransmission lines, are where we see it used most frequently, typically in developed areas. So it's not going to be a big economic benefit to use tree growth regulators in areas where you can get draft saws in there and do heavy mechanical pruning and things like that. But anywhere you have to have a bucket crews, and especially climbers, you're going to see huge benefits because just the pruning costs and the labor associated with those are much higher. So in terms of the actual benefits, there've been a couple of studies. It's hard to track records when budgets are so inconsistent from year to year in
Yeah.
utilities as it is. But some of the ones where they have looked at it, you can see savings over the course of three or 4 years as little as maybe 20 to 40% for some of those front yard bucket prune areas, much higher, 70+% for backlot or difficult or sensitive areas that you have to have a climbing crew to access. So that's in a nutshell, probably the economics of it. We can get a lot more specific with other benefits we see. I have a lot of utilities who use this talk about an improvement in their SAIDI, SAFE, CAIDI scores, or all the reliability metrics. So that helps them save in the long run. A lot of those cost control measures come from a reduction in any reactive or mid-cycle work that they have to do throughout the years. And even when they do have to come back and prune the trees, they've grown a lot less, so there's a lot less brush to move. They can move a bit more efficiently as they're going through their circuit again and hauling away all that debris. So many different ways. Those are some of the basic ones. Any more
I mean,
specifics you want to dive into?
no, I appreciate you covering that. A follow up to that would be timing, right?
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit about the application method? Because I think that that's a operationally speaking, how does utilities integrate this into their existing processes to be efficient and effective at the application process?
Absolutely, and that is a huge topic. And
Mm,
I do a fair amount of speaking out at conferences, and I do a few different topics. One of the talks I'm developing right now, my working title for it is "Why TGRs Fail." Right, we're going for the kind of the clickbait method there, right? You'll be shocked.
Hmm.
And in a nutshell, it comes down to implementation.
mhm,
And I think that's one of the biggest areas where utilities that have implemented TGR programs and not seen the results they want, it comes down to having not developed a good scope, right? What trees they do and don't want to target. It comes down to maybe not selecting the best areas to target TGRs, trying to either do a blanket approach, which can work, and absolutely we do have utility partners who try and get every single tree they can. But with a limited budget, obviously you're not going to see as good of results as if you're doing a more targeted approach. And then, as you mentioned, timing. And timing is a big one. So the product itself works, and we want to delve into a little bit of a science lesson as we're working into this one.
absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
perfect. All right. So this, like I said, tree nerd here. I love talking about this stuff.
Hmm.
Um, how it works in the tree itself is we are going to be reducing the production of a hormone called gibberellins or gibberellic acid. And what gibberellins are responsible for, among other things, is cellular elongation. So imagine you've got these trees and they don't know that they're planted in someone's front yard under a power line. As far as the tree is concerned, it's in a forest, it's surrounded by other trees. And its primary resource limiter in a forest is actually going to be sunlight, right? It's not
Mhm.
water, it's not nutrients, it's sunlight. And so it's in the tree's best interest to resprout as fast as possible when it loses its canopy and get back into that canopy space so it doesn't lose out on possible sunlight from competition from other trees. And how it does this isn't necessarily by growing faster, it's by stretching out its branches. I know that's a distinction without a difference, but the cells don't divide faster, they stretch out, kind of like they get pulled thinner like Laffy Taffy. That's why those branches look so straight and spindly.
Yeah.
And the wood itself is typically weaker. There's a lot of sprouts, so the branch unions are really weak, but the tree doesn't care because it's just trying to regain that lost canopy space. So what paclobutrazol does is it gets in there and it blocks a step in the metabolic pathway that produces gibberellins. It's kind of like throwing a wrench into the cogs of an assembly line. And all that energy goes somewhere else, and we can talk about that too if you like, and why it's a beneficial process for the trees. But by blocking the gibberellins, we are preventing that rapid regrowth, that stretching out of those branches. So how this relates to timing. The process of producing those gibberellins really kicks in at the time of pruning. The tree loses its part of that canopy and it goes, oh no, I need to regrow as fast as possible, and it starts producing those gibberellins at a higher rate. So you want to treat the tree within a window of pruning to really maximize on the reduction of those gibberellins. And the label says 60 days before or after pruning. The closer to that pruning date you can get, or even just, a couple of weeks before would be my perfect time window, the more control you're going to get on that process. So the challenge then for the manager is timing your pruning crews and your TGR application crews to be out there around the same time. And since TGRs are a much faster process than pruning, as you can imagine, a single TGR applicator could probably be working alongside 3 or 4 plus or more prune crews on the circuit at the same time.
Yeah.
So planning that work throughout the year can be a little challenging. I've seen some creative and awesome ways of dealing with it. One of my favorite methods that I've heard of is Forester likes to leave his worst performing circuits for the end of the year, and then have us come out there. They're a farther southern state, so come out there in the winter and do them at the same time to make sure he gets that timing right on those particularly troublesome circuits.
That's interesting information.
Yeah.
So tell us, where does it go if it's not in, or the gibberellins, if not into elongation?
Absolutely. So that energy, like I said, has to go somewhere. And this is why, and where it goes is into production primarily of a different hormone called abscisic acid. All right. We're going to, I don't know if there's CEUs associated with this podcast, but I'd be making you earn them today. Abscisic acid is often called the stress hormone. Sometimes I've heard it called the protection hormone. It's what the tree produces when it thinks it's under stress, primarily through something like drought. Occasionally insect infestation, things like that. But drought's one of the more common culprits for initiating abscisic acid production. So what that does to the tree is it encourages it to produce more fibrous roots, right? So not the big structural roots that are going to push up your sidewalk, but the tiny hair-like ones that are going to take up water and nutrients. It's also going to encourage the tree to have a thicker, waxier cuticle. That's that kind of the waxy layer on the outside of a leaf. So it's going to lose less water. You're going to see less sun scorch on those leaves. And it's going to encourage the stomata, or the gas exchange pores on the bottom of the leaf, to stay closed a bit more often than they would otherwise, again, preventing water loss and preventing some of the worst effects from drought. So what we see with the use of paclobutrazol is trees that are a lot more drought tolerant. And if you're in an area where there is no drought, even better. The tree doesn't know there's a drought or not. It's still going to have those responses, and it's just going to end up with much, much, much greener leaves, and kind of a tighter canopy in that regard. Sometimes the leaves are a little small too. We will see that in some species where maples in particular, they'll end up with littler leaves, which can look kind of fun. But by and large, that's just cosmetics, and the tree itself is generally happier. In fact, outside of the utility world, these same products, paclobutrazol-based ones, are used super commonly by commercial arborists for trees that are drought stressed, or for trees that larger ones that have been transplanted 4 inches in diameter or greater, or trees that are having other issues. What I like to say always is it doesn't cure any diseases or any issues with trees, but it's great to follow up as something to help it recover from those stressful incidents.
Gives the tree a fighting chance.
Absolutely, right. It's like the cough medicine you take, but you also still need the penicillin to treat the disease or whatever you're dealing with it.
Yeah. On that topic, and I did a pilot program out west in my
Yeah.
previous life. The big topic I was exploring at that point in time was not only treating yard trees and ornamentals, etc.,
Hmm.
people's that people trees that people cared about the most, but another component to this was orchard-related trees,
Hmm.
fruit production trees for food consumption. And I know that at that point in time there was some discussions about because in Europe and
Yep.
various other first world countries, parts of the of the world, they do this. They utilize
Yes.
tree growth regulator to on fruit production. And can you tell me where we're at with that in the United States in terms of
Sure.
approval process? Because it's a big challenge out west, and especially California, where
Absolutely.
the breadbasket of the world. So
Yep, I'm familiar with the project you're referring to as well. It's one that we've done some work on, and even outside just power lines that go over orchards, right? Just
hmm
like the use this product could have on fruit production. So, it would actually be pretty great if we were able to use paclobutrazol on more an industrial agriculture scale in the U.S. At the moment, we cannot. One of
hmm
the things you're going to see and why it is used in other countries is with the reduction of that branch growth, it doesn't reduce the number of buds that are produced. It doesn't reduce the number of flowers are produced. In fact, at a lot of species, that abscisic acid is going to encourage more flowering, and you end up with a higher, fruit per stem count. And it's something that gets used heavily in. You mentioned Europe. I know of it being used at like almond groves in Mexico, because
yeah
they can get more nuts per stem with the trees, and that's obviously a really big deal. What it comes down to is simply economics at this point, and in particular government regulation. So when it was something that we were looking into, or at least the parent company, I wasn't involved in that project. It is not a quick or easy or cheap process to get FDA approval for a chemical pesticide use, and paclobutrazol is regulated by the EPA. It is
hmm
regulated as a pesticide, even though it doesn't harm most species. It's not easy to get that approved for agricultural use. So
yeah
what any company that wants to do that is looking at is probably minimum half a million or several hundred, or not several hundred million, excuse me, several $100,000 per species to get that label approval to be used for agricultural purposes. The second challenge then is the labor to it. At this point in time, you can't do Paclo in a drip line, so it has to be applied per tree on a per tree basis. So that's pretty labor intensive as well. Again, I know they do this in other countries. My favorite saying is, if you've eaten an almond, chances are it came from Mexico. And if it came from Mexico, chances are they used Paclo at some point or other in that tree's life. So it's
yeah
not a question of human consumption safety. It's just about the logistics of getting it through the approval process with the FDA
yeah
for use in ag purposes. And
yeah understandably so.
it's not something that we're pursuing on a large scale. I know there was a research trial that would have allowed us to do just I think it was just almonds and just under the power lines and nothing else. But that's as far as that one ever got.
Interesting. Yeah. Hopefully, we start to see more exploration in that
Yeah.
adoption theory.
So, talk to us a little bit about the industry's adoption. I
Yeah.
mean, they've been at it for decades. Where do we stand?
Where do we stand? That's a good one. So I think back when they were called CNUC, it's EUC now, right? They actually did a study a few years back in 2019. Don't quote me on that. Where they were surveying managers on a lot of different tree
Yeah,
related
the
topics.
benchmark. Mm.
Exactly right. The benchmark one. You probably know better than I do,
Yeah,
but I do
used to
know that if
support it way back in my life.
they had a few questions in there about TGRs, and not a very large percentage of utilities said that they used them. It was less than 20% for sure, and even fewer said that they felt that they were important in their vegetation management program. Which what I've run into the most is we do have a few dozen utilities out there that work with us, and I know there are more that do TGRs with other vendors as well. So it is gaining steam, it's gaining popularity, especially as folks are having a chance to implement it over the course of several years. And after they get past that first trial period, they're seeing, oh man, they have a hard time convincing their higher ups that they need this but they don't want to get rid of it because these foresters are seeing the results they're getting and how less frequently they're having to go back and send crews to those trees. So slowly but surely, I think the tide is changing. It's just about making that business case and demonstrating to the decision makers with the budget that this is a good decision. It is a good investment for the future. But it can be a hard pill to swallow because you're going to have a higher initial cost the first year that you start using the service, and it'll take a couple of years before you start seeing those returns.
Yeah.
As with all good practices, right?
Yeah.
The fairy dust idea may come from the legacy. They used to be very inconsistent control. So
Yeah.
it would control 90% of the crown, but who cares? Because it only takes one branch falling
Yep.
on the lines to cause a problem.
Yep. And
So
I'll still see that sometimes. One of the other tricks about TGRs is once you cut the branch after you do the treatment, a few months later, you'll cut out any of the product that's in that branch tip. So
Yeah.
any of the paclobutrazol that's in that branch tip is gone, and that particular branch is free to resprout. So I have seen one of my favorite pictures is, imagine someone doing the rock on symbol, right, with the two fingers up. It's a tree that's got a shelf cut to it, and it's just got two branches sticking up. And the homeowner had admitted to coming back and trimming those two branches, and it's like, yep, I can see that.
Yeah. Yeah, so in that space, that's a good point. There's a couple of different things I want to follow up on. I think that to your point, since that study came out like 10 years ago, things have changed
Hmm.
drastically in the utility space, and I would say especially within the last few years, with the new buzzword of resiliency, affordability,
Yes.
grid modernization. A lot of things are coming into play, and vegetation management has really shifted from this ancillary large budget item that we go and cyclically prune trees and
Hmm.
remove whatever the case may be. We're looking at the industry very differently now of what can we use from remote sensing, advanced technologies, advanced equipment, specialized equipment, etc. And tree growth regulators being one of those
Yes.
details to offset the challenges that we've historically faced. And if you look at the outage statistics and data, most of the outages that are caused is from tree related issues, right? So
Hmm.
focusing in on this changing, and I think that TGRs are going to have a more common place within the market space in the next 5 to 10 years because of that. One of the things that would follow up on your comments that you're talking about customer engagement, FDA approval, et cetera, have you noticed pushback, public perception with chemical applications and controlled substances in the space has been negative because of some of the issues we've seen with some of the big players in the space. But how have you overcome some of those challenges with just public perception, executive perception of the safety long term of this product?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. And we do run into that. So we typically will run programs as opt-out programs, as we
Yeah.
call them. So with our utility partners, we'll go out and we'll do a notification process where we're both doing the work planning and selecting the trees, but also having those conversations with the property owners, or leaving a door card or something behind, where they can get some information and call us about them. Um, we have a lot of these conversations with these property owners, and there are a lot who are chemically averse. They don't trust utilities in general. They don't trust chemicals at all. And what we find is most folks, if we have a chance to actually have a conversation with them, either face to face or over the phone, a lot of them they're like, okay, I can see this. We explain some of the benefits they're going to see to the health of the tree, and we explain like, oh, the real point of this and why the utility is paying for it is it's going to reduce how frequently they have to come back and trim this tree, and that's a big selling point too for a lot of homeowners
Oh
is
yeah,
they
absolutely.
hate having
Care
the
about the
equipment on the
privacy.
exactly. They don't want the crews on their land as often, and there are always going to be some who, no matter what you tell them, they're against it and they don't want to do it and they opt out. That's fine. That's their right. Sometimes the utility will instead give them a choice. It's like, well, we can do the TGRs or we can remove the tree, and that changes their mind pretty fast.
Yeah.
But we rarely see more than somewhere between 3 and 5% of folks opt out. Most people are totally cool with the treatment, even in like very, I will say, environmentally friendly parts of the country, right? You can probably think of a few cities off the top of your head. I am talking
Mm,
about those cities.
yeah.
There's maybe 5% there, but still not as many as you might expect.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that perception is going to change once we start getting more data, more long-term data on the
Yep.
application. Yeah.
And there've been some studies too. State of California has done a really good environmental review on paclobutrazol, especially with regards to soil mobility. And when you're doing soil injections, since these products, the molecule itself is ionized, it'll grip right to any soil that has
Yeah,
any
it's low
organic matter
soil
in it.
mobility,
Yeah.
which is great.
So it's not gonna just drift away and end up in a nearby waterway. State of Massachusetts also did a good study on with regards to pollinators,
Hmm.
and shows that it has no real effect on pollinators unless you literally like dump the product on the bee, which
Put
why?
water on a bee, it's probably
Yeah,
not going to do
pretty
very well.
much, right?
Yeah.
But
So
it's not something that's going to show up in the pollen and have a negative, or in the flowers or anything, and have a negative impact on those pollinators. So we're also able to point to these studies with the folks who really want to get into it, and with
yeah.
higher ups at utilities who have these concerns. And again, just sharing the data that's out there has done a really good job of helping people gain more understanding about it.
Now, one thing about the flowers, real quick, before I forget, one of the
Yes,
things I found fascinating is that if there was a flower beds within the drip line or the base of the tree where you treat and
yes,
it translocates, you get miniature flowers and miniature plants, almost like
yeah,
organic bonsai
it
type
is.
situation.
I've seen that.
So
It's actually kind of adorable, but they're brighter
yeah,
colored generally,
they are.
right?
Yeah, more
So
vibrant.
I've seen this a bed of tulips around a tree, and it's really just in that application area. So just imagine like a foot outside the root flare,
Yeah.
just that inner ring of flowers is much smaller, and then from out there they're fine again. And it's only really the bulb ones. It takes, I say it takes the growing season to really start seeing the effects of paclobutrazol. So if you've got your annuals, it's not going to show up in them, but those perennials, yeah, we'll see that, and it can be kind of cute. If
And it
there's a flower
product
bed, we'll
lasts
warn them.
roughly 3 to 4 years is how long the
Yep,
product's viable within the tree. And then
absolutely.
in that space too, with paclobutrazol and utilizing it for tree growth regulator, et cetera, from a viability standpoint, you mentioned earlier, and I want to make sure that the audience hears this, is that
Hmm.
if you trim it midstream, right, then that loses its functionality. So
Yes,
I'm assuming the best practice is to retreat before trim next time, evaluate, but retreat within that window so you can continue to carry on that cellular elongation control,
correct.
maximize your cycle length. So this
Yes,
effectively would replace the trimming cost and cycle period
it can,
in 3 to 4
absolutely.
years.
So
Okay,
it's
gotcha.
tree to tree, right? So I don't want anybody to hear that and think, oh, I can skip,
Every tree
an
is different. They're
entire
all
Yeah.
living
tree on my
things. Yeah,
system. Exactly,
yeah.
right? So it is tree by tree, and that's we do this with with some of our utility partners as well, right? So at that 3-year mark where the product is starting to wear out in the tree, um, we'll go back and we'll be out there usually at the same time as the other work planners who are assessing the trees for pruning, and knowing the growth rates of the tree and seeing how well regulated it was can make a decision like retreat this. There are a lot of trees that can just get away with being only retreated and not trimmed again, and they can make it a full 6+ years before they'd actually need to be trimmed again.
Hmm.
Others will still need trimming after, some of those really, really fast growing species, right? Some of your cottonwoods and whatnot. But again,
Yeah,
you can trim and retreat and do both at the same time, and at least you're not doing as much,
yeah.
mid-cycle work on those reactive work.
Now this is a sorry, Phil. I've been
No, go
I'm
ahead.
really passionate about this, but
No, I love
so
this.
what trees does it work on? Deciduous, evergreen, and then
Yeah.
let's get into the monocots because that's another big topic of conversation of how
Yes.
we do
Oh, the
control palms
monocots.
and bamboo
The
and those
liars, the
things.
knot trees. Yes.
Yeah,
All right. So we're gonna have to first of all to define what we mean by work. When it says we work on a tree.
slows growth.
There we go. Well, then it
Yes,
works on all of them, technically. Technically.
gotcha.
Now, slows growth. I'd add to that slows growth to the effect that you're actually going to see a benefit, right? You're going to
Hmm.
see a cost benefit. You're not going to have to come back on that tree as frequently as you would otherwise, right? So the bread and butter is going to be, your deciduous trees.
Hmm.
Your Most of these ones, just the way their growing cycle throughout the year works, and the product works really, really well on them. It can work on conifers, right? So when we're out on, especially West Coast and some of those southern areas, we absolutely do treat conifers in California in particular. People love to plant redwoods underneath the power lines.
Oh yeah.
Tallest growing species in the world sounds like a great choice to me. uh, right under the power lines. And for conifers, topped ones in particular, we will see growth reduction. It requires it's the highest rate, whatever label you're using, it's going to be the highest rate category, and even then, you're going to be lucky to get them from an annual prune to maybe 2 years. At that point, they're still going to come back pretty fast. So the reason we generally avoid conifers, except in some of those like really dramatic areas, is because they put all of their growth effort into that one single stem, right? They're very excurrent species, and the amount of product it takes to actually get any re-regulation on that is huge, and also not legal because we can't go above the rates that the EPA lets
Product
us.
label.
Yeah, so we can get some regulation on those, but for most utilities, especially those who aren't in very warm climates with very long growing seasons, you're not going to see the benefits on conifers that you're going to see on your deciduous trees. So again, it's about scope development at that point. Some of the other ones, like we'll do like some of the cypress trees, Leland cypress, as well as like bald or pond or whatnot. Again, only if they're topped and they're right under the line. But those are few and far between. So the growth habit is what matters with the deciduous versus the conifers. That's kind of why we make that recommendation. The monocots, man, I know, I wish it worked better on bamboo. Really, I do. So there are some labels of paclobutrazol out there that are meant for use on monocots. There's a lot of turf labels out there that golf courses and turf farms and such use. You had to use a lower rate form because they're more sensitive to it, but also with the trees. And if you can't see me, I'm doing air quotes around trees when I talk about palms. It just doesn't get the results you'd be looking for, like to slow them down before they actually get up to the line. Just the way that the growth habit of those trees work, the product isn't as effective at slowing down that upward growth. So we don't ever recommend really using the soil injection methods on palms. I just say don't plant them near near power lines, or remove them if you can. And you're nodding because you totally agree with me on that one. Same with bamboo. It's just it hasn't shown to be effective. Certainly not with the methods we're using. More research required. I'd love to get into it to some more, but not something we see used an awful lot in the industry at this time.
So, Liz, you started off in the field as a technician. Now
Yes.
you seem to be an educator, and it feels
Try.
like it's a good fit for you.
I love it.
Yeah, well, I can tell that it comes through.
Well, I mean, that's how I got my start there. Was as a technician in the field. Our technicians are kind of all in one. They go out and they do the work planning and the tree selection. They have the conversations with the homeowners, and then they go back and do the application. And the conversations were by far some of my favorites. Being able to talk about the trees and what we're doing for them was such a fun time. And also some of the other conversations you get with homeowners, and some of the crazy things they see. If you've not heard my talk on aggressive homeowners and interacting with them, I've got some fun stories from the years on that, but a little unrelated to TGRs.
So we're going to have you back and listen to stories.
Fair enough. Hey, I'll come back. No worries there.
Well, this has been a lot of fun. It really has been interesting. I have a feeling that our listeners are thinking there's 3 tree nerds.
I think so.
But that's okay. Thanks for joining us today. Follow us on LinkedIn for updates and to tune in again to the Trees and Lines podcast.